Welcome to the special meeting of the Oakland Council. It's a very important meeting. Thank you all for coming. There are people that will be watching on YouTube tonight. I thank the OCC for recording for us. Thank you so much. Can you hear? Tonight's presentation is part of a regular council meeting. It's a special council meeting, so we will follow the rules of order of the council. Before we start, everyone look at your phone and please put it on mute or turn it off. Because there will be a presentation with questions and answers, and the way the program will be tonight is our engineer, our expert, Kevin Boswell. Raise your hand, Kevin. He's our expert. He will make the presentation. All the slides are on top, on the screen. Then afterwards, we will answer questions. So hold your questions, write them down so that it's continuous. At this time, roll call.
Mayor Schwager.
Here.
Councilman Kamala. Here. Councilman McCann. Councilman Pignatelli.
Here.
Councilman Saliani.
Here.
Councilman Zasinski.
Here.
Councilman Palomini.
Here.
Anybody know if Councilman McCann is coming?
I believe he's on vacation. I don't know. Motion to excuse? Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is being held in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Law, duly announced, advertised, and posted in the municipal building. The meeting will adjourn at 10 p.m. unless the majority of the council members that are present vote to extend the time. At this time, we ask that you stand and salute the flag and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. And now I turn the meeting over to Kevin Boswell, our engineer.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Can everybody hear me, or would you like?
We need the mic.
Okay. My name is Kevin Boswell. I'm the borough engineer. I'm a licensed engineer in New Jersey, and we serve a number of northern New Jersey towns as their municipal engineers, and we also serve as the engineer of record for 6 water systems, various sewer systems throughout the state, regional authorities and things of that nature. What I'm here to talk about is actually an update on an earlier presentation that we gave a year ago concerning PFAS in drinking water, not just in Oakland, but throughout the state of New Jersey and throughout the United States. It's a very prevalent compound that we find in drinking water throughout the country. So, PFAS, what are they? They are substances that are manufactured. They were used in the manufacture of carpets for stain fighting purposes, clothing, again, for stain fighting purposes. A lot of them are used in firefighting foam, cosmetics, dental floss, insect repellent. You get the picture, popcorn wrappers, microwave popcorn that you may have used over the years. And basically what they were are they made things either slippery or more water repellent. So they're widespread, extremely persistent in the environment. Oakland's water system is frankly an excellent water system. It's got 4 through, I believe, 16-inch piping running throughout the borough. It services essentially all of the customers within the municipality. If you go next slide, what we do is we run different components of a water system. So we have wells that supply. We then pump that water into storage tanks that store. We have disinfection systems that treat chlorine, and in this case, we're introducing a new treatment system, and that is a treatment system for these compounds, PFAs. Once it's treated, it's actually treated before it goes to a storage tank. It comes out of the well. It may be merged with other wells or just comes out. It's what we refer to as a point of entry. And if you look here, you see well 10, well 5, well 9, and then what we refer to as the Soon's well field. Each of the 3 wells over on the left-hand side have a separate point of entry going into your water system, while the Soon's well field has 4 wells and they have a single point of entry. So you have a total of 4 points of entry, and that's material to how you treat this, because you effectively, you can test at the wells, but you treat at the point of entry. So you theoretically have 4 separate points of entry that we would be talking about later in this presentation about putting in treatment for these compounds. Next slide. This is what I couldn't remember earlier when I was looking at the map. 380,000 linear feet of water main, 4 to 12 inches. There's 6 water storage tanks that store a little over 4 million gallons. Again, you want to store at least 1 day's supply. You're well over that with your 4 million gallons of storage. There's other reasons that you may have more, and in the case of Oakland, it's because you have 4 pressure zones. So it's not always easy to get water around the borough when you need it. So what we do is we use pumping stations to pump up to these tanks, and these tanks establish the pressure zone or the float for that particular area of the borough. And these tanks are sized not just for your water consumption purposes, but also for fire flow. So the tanks, serve a dual role, that they're there to maintain a certain fire flow for a certain duration in the case of fire, and we don't want to rely on pumping stations to do that. We want to rely on gravity, so these tanks feed into the system. Next slide. And then if you saw at the bottom, your population was about 12.7 people a day. So the regulatory standards that apply that we're talking about is the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's a federal standard that was passed in 1974. It's been amended in 86 and 96. Bless you. And what happens is the U.S., in the case we really refer to it as the U.S. EPA, creates regulatory standards. And they may also create advisory levels, but they have standards that you must meet as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. The state of New Jersey can then take those standards and increase them as they seem fit. For instance, in the US EPA standard for arsenic, it's 10 parts per million, but in the case of New Jersey, it's 5 parts per million. So it's a different standard. So New Jersey has a number of standards that are higher than the federal standards. And in fact, the PFAs are a higher standard than the federal standard, which we'll get to in a moment. And then the other thing that goes on is that there's about 90 compounds that the EPA regulates, again, with standards, but they also test for several hundred more. And they do it on 5-year increments, and they call it the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring reviews. And your water operator, every water system has a licensed water operator. So that's not us. That's a certain person that's specially trained to operate the water systems, and this individual files those, makes those tests, samples the water, sends it out to the lab, runs a different set of battery tests of all of the unregulated contaminants, sends them to the US EPA. They review all of that, and then they may or may not introduce new standards to treat unregulated contaminants. So every 5 years, there's a fresh look at all of the standards that happens at a federal level. And again, there's also another fresh look that may happen on a state level, which is actually what happened with the PFAs, again, which I'll get to in a moment. So the standards that happened with PFAs are summarized above. And they came into being in late 2018. PFNA was adopted at 13 parts per trillion, not million, not billion, trillion. And the PFOA, MCL is maximum contaminant level. You see it defined up there. That's 14 parts per trillion. That was adopted in June of 2020, and PFOS, a related compound, again, was adopted at the same time. And then what happened was the standards went into effect, and then the testing started in the first quarter of 2021. And so your licensed operator, Kevin, who does a great job, has to go out, and every quarter he has to test every well, every point of entry for the regulated compounds. Unless it's this 5-year interval, he has to test for all of the regulated compounds, 90 compounds. And then he takes that information and sends it, as soon as he gets it back, he sends it right down to DEP. It's all public information. It's WaterWatch. So you can look it up. You can look up any of the information. Just Google WaterWatch. Every single water system in the state of New Jersey, every single public water system is on WaterWatch. So and then what happens is it is not a you can get a level that is higher than 14, and it's not a violation because it is calculated by the running annual average, the RAA. So you could have something that, let's say, is 4 times 14, and if you have 52 parts per trillion, you exceed the running annual average because for the year you're already over. So what happens is all of these water operators test it, and they watch it fluctuate. And you'll see some of the results that we have here for the last year. You'll see it goes up and down. And but if you go above the running annual average, that's when effectively you have to take a different course of action pursuant to the DEP standards. So in 2022, well, before that, EPA had an advisory level of 70 parts per trillion total of all 3 of these compounds. So it wasn't quite the same as the way New Jersey did it, but it was an advisory standard. So so when we say New Jersey took a higher standard, they did. And so in June of this year, you may have heard that the EPA has now come out with new advisory standards of 2 parts per trillion. I'm sorry, 0.004 parts per trillion and 0.02. What you should know is the minimum detection limit that we can actually even measure is 2. And that is is by a very few select number of labs in this part of the country. At the time when DEP adopted the standards at the top of this slide, there were only 4 labs that were available to make that testing, and the testing labs actually had to rework everything. So again, these are standards that came into being that effectively took what we were consuming for decades and applied a whole new standard. So as you can imagine, there's a transition to go from where we have been for decades to where the new standards, where the new regulatory limits are taking us. So we are in that transition phase. Next slide. By point of reference, 1 part per trillion is a single drop of water in 20 Olympic swimming pools. So, so we're talking about a little less than a drop of water. The standards come out to a little less than a drop of water in a swimming pool, a little more than a drop of water in every swimming pool for these existing New Jersey standards. So we're dealing with very, very low tolerances, and you know, if you just take your sample jar and it has any type of contamination on that, it's not completely sterile, your results can be skewed to a very large degree. And we see that a lot, and you know, we do control samples and things like that in the whole custody of the waters that is sampled, and again, the results, every result that we get is conveyed to DEP. There is no ability of the licensed water operator to select a certain set of samples and not report another set of samples. They are all sent down. He is personally liable, and there's actually precedent where criminal charges have been brought against a licensed water operator for not doing exactly what I just summarized. So here's the results for what's going on for the 4 points of entry in Oakland. So effectively, you have well number 5 is currently operating within the standards for the last column, the running annual average. So you see it go from 15.6 for, first of all, PFNA, very low. PFOS, again, below the standards. PFOA, you see it, it goes, the MCL is 14. In the third quarter of 2021, it was 15.6. Fourth quarter of 2021, it was 12, below 2022, and then it goes down to 10.2. The running annual average is 13.38. Well, number 10, that's the one that currently has exceeded the running annual average, and so I'll get to what happens when that happens for both PFOS and PFOA. Wells number, Soon's Wellfield, no, and well number 9, no. However, if you go back and you look at well number 5, there was a point in time when they did exceed the running annual average. So once it happens, once you're into the what I'll refer to as a corrective action plan, okay? And Giselle Diaz and I, Giselle is the head of our wastewater department. She has decades of experience, and we always deal with this situation in every water system that we're working on. So once that happens, there's a corrective plan that gets kicked into place. And next slide. So just to break down what's going on here, it's well number 9, well number 10. They comprise about 32% of your water there. And as far as the compliant water and non-compliant water, about 86% of your water is compliant. The reason why this is material is because we have to test at the points of entry, okay? And then the water gets shipped up to the tanks, and then it gets blended with other sources of water. We don't test at the tanks. We have tested at the tanks, but DEP, that's not material to what DEP standards are, so we don't spend the money testing for that. I can tell you in other municipalities where a well tested high, we went up to the tank and tested, and it was quite a bit below the standards. So we haven't done that here. It's not something that really is germane to what's happening because it doesn't change what I'll refer to again as a corrective action plan. So according to the Department of Health, what's happened is that they took this and they require, it goes to the first thing that happens with it, if there's an exceedance of this running annual average. Within 30 days, a public notice must be issued to every single customer of the water system. So you have all, I'm sure, received a notice that says there's been an exceedance of the running annual average. The wording of that document is specific to the DEP standards. We actually have to take it, prepare it, send it to DEP, receive their approval on all of the wording, then come back, and once we have their approval, we can issue the public notice. So, so all of the things that you're seeing up here where the EPA website states individuals concerned about levels of PFAS and found water should consider reduced, drinking and consult with their professional health care. All of that verbiage is directly mandated by the DEP. So we follow their protocols to the T. There's no compromise or no negotiation. We just follow their standards to the T. The other thing that happens is we have to file a remedial measures report. The remedial measures report says that what are you going to do to address this? And what the DEP has is they have a 1-year timeline that you are to design a system, which we'll get to in a moment. You have to get the permits for that system. Since this is public money, you have to prepare bid documents and publicly bid it, award it, and construct it. So there's a whole process you need to go through, and we are going through that. We'll come to that in a moment. So next slide. The treatment options, there's 3 of them. Frankly, they're not all that difficult to understand. Granular activated carbon, GAC, is very similar to what you see in a Brita water filter, another type of water filter. This is not a commercial for Brita. But GAC is a very tried and true method. There's a second one referred to as ion exchange. Again, it's a very simple, it's a very similar system to GAC. It's resin pellets that you put into the vessel instead of GAC, and those pellets absorb the materials out of them, and just like GAC, you have to swap it out and dispose of it, and we send it back to the company that we buy it from, buy new GAC, place it back into service. The last method is more complicated and more costly, and this is reverse osmosis RO. It hasn't really caught its stride on a public water system. They make RO systems for houses. They do it for whole house systems. They do it for point of use. They use POET, point of entry treatment, and point of use and so it's POU, and you might see them underneath your kitchen sink, something like that. What does it look like? They look just like this. If you ride around many different towns throughout the state of New Jersey, you will see these. You usually see them in sets of twos because the DEP requires that you have 2 of them. So you'll always see 2 or 4 or 6 or something like that. We have 6 going in one town. We have 2 at another well. We have 2 at another well. Again, very straightforward, very effective. As soon as you put them in, the wells start meeting all the standards. The nice thing about these, on the technical side of it, is the water comes out of the well, it's under pressure, and it goes through the chlorination system, the disinfection system. It's chlorination here. It could be ozone, it could be a lot of different things, UV, but it goes through under pressure, and then it goes right through these under pressure, and that's really nice because then you can just send it to the water tanks. It's a very effective, efficient system. There's actually no power other than this piping here that you see. We will cover that with insulation and heat tape for weatherproofing, but other than that, that's what you see, and there's no pumps or anything like that. So it's a very efficient system in terms of putting it in, and like I said earlier, it's not that complicated. Resin, same thing. They look just like it, they're smaller. And in fact, because of that interchangeability, some water systems are actually designing a carbon system, and then if they need a higher level of treatment at some point in the future with the regulations changing, because they do change, they could take out the carbon and put in resin. And so we know of a lot of different people that are doing that, and we actually we're currently going forward with a carbon system, so we have that opportunity in our design. The last one, this nanofiltration, the RO system, as I said, on a large scale, commercial public system, it becomes pretty complicated, pretty expensive, and unless there was a specific reason that the other 2 treatment alternatives, technologies, were unfeasible, we would not recommend this. So everything has an action plan. I refer to it as a corrective action plan, but so just before this, we had to file something called a remedial measures report that said we were going to do X, Y, and Z by a certain date, which is a year out. So this is just a chart showing you what we're doing. So at number 1, quarterly testing, that's going to be ongoing forever. Your water system, that's just part of the normal operation of the well, but it's germane because we see that there's, like we said, one well has just come down, and if you were to sample it on the RAA today, it's compliant. But it doesn't matter because we're already in the corrective plan for that well. So it's already ongoing. So it is due to the initial exceedance. Analysis of treatment options, as I told you, we recommended GAC. It's the most cost effective, and it's the more conservative going forward if you decide to go to an RO system. You can, as I said earlier, you can put resin in a carbon system, you can't put carbon in a resin system. Design and submit the treatment system. Giselle and her staff have already done that. That went in May. That was actually stipulated in the RMR. That went in. We've received comments back. They've been Giselle, you submit it back in. And then in the case of Oakland, you not only have water permits, water system permits, which Giselle handles, you also have land use permits because these wells are situated in regulated areas. By regulated areas, we mean riparian buffers, flood hazard areas, floodplain, floodway, and they could be in wetlands or transition areas, so there has to be a land use permit gotten for these wells. So that's just a level of complexity, which frankly adds a pretty good level of complexity in the case of the Oakland wells. And we're dealing with that. That's coming along as well. We plan on bidding and awarding this over the winter and install the treatment system by the end of next year. Now you're saying, why isn't that being done within a year? There's two real reasons. The first one is that the new standards have effectively caused a major supply chain issue in the availability of the GAC filters. There's about a year backlog. It's 40 weeks, 50. It's almost a year, 10 months to a year. So, and as soon as this happened, we went to, there are different parts of DEP. There's water monitoring, there's water permitting that Giselle deals with, and there's enforcement. And effectively, once the exceedance happens and this RMR report gets submitted, it involves DEP enforcement. So we went to the people at DEP enforcement, we asked for a meeting, and we said, how is this possible to do, given the fact that you can't even get these GAC units for 40 to 50 weeks? And so they told us, put in what you really think is realistic, which is what you see behind me here. And as soon as we hit 12 months and a day, you're going to see another notice that we haven't complied with the 12-month standard that they required us to go to. And you may actually see, going forward, that the DEP is going to come in here and ask the borough to execute what's referred to as an administrative consent order to ensure that they're continuing to do the right thing and move this along. I can assure you that that's exactly what we're doing, and it is not a difficult thing to do. It just needs to get done, and we can demonstrate that the borough has taken effectively all the correct steps at every step along the way. The other resources, this is in your handout, so we encourage you to please look these up, because everything we're talking about is public information. The RMR is public information, the test results, the public notices. We do everything in a very, it's a very transparent manner. And I don't know if they're on the borough's website, but it's on the DEP's website. You can just look it up. And Water Watch will give you everything you need to know about every water system. And part of the problem, though, when you see the Water Watch system, what happens a lot, and I mean not just infrequently, but it happens pretty often, is there will be an apparent violation, which is referred to as a reporting violation, and it's subsequently found out it wasn't a violation. So when you take a look at that, and I don't know in the case of Oakland whether or not that's the case, but if there's a reporting violation, I would be very surprised that it really is a reporting violation, because every licensed water operator knows how important it is to get those results in a timely manner. So it's very unusual to see that really work out, where 6 months later they expunge that record, but for some reason it still shows up on Water Watch. So I just ask you to keep that in mind. And that's the limit of our formal presentation, and I and Giselle are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, normally, if it was a regular council meeting, it would be open to the public comment for 3 minutes. However, this is a very important meeting, special meeting for full disclosure and to keep the public informed. So we ask that you come up to the microphone and ask your questions and wait for the answers. Please be respectful, of the people in front of you or behind you. Come right up to the microphone. You have to give your name and address before you ask the question. We're open to the floor for questions.
Hi.
Hi.
Andrea Levy, 780 Ramapo Valley Road in Oakland. Got a couple of questions for you, actually. You mentioned a certified water operator,
Yeah, licensed water operator.
licensed water operator. Is that person a borough employee or employed elsewhere and working for the town, servicing the town?
It's a borough employee.
A borough employee.
That could be answered by Richard.
Yeah,
Administrator.
the actual certified licensed operator of record for the system is our DPW superintendent, Anthony Marcuselli.
And given our history, who oversees, and you mentioned a few times not to worry about the reports, but I think that we actually have reason to worry about the reports given our history of things not being reported in time or ever. What is in place to make sure that it does get reported?
Our administrator, that's a question.
Yeah, and,
Okay.
yeah, so certainly he reports to me, obviously. But I also just want to point out there's fundamentally a bit of a different reporting system on the water side than the sewer side. Monthly versus annual checks from the department and notifications of, deficient reports and the like. And Anthony's overseeing the sewer division, the water division operator, who's actually the one doing a lot of that work on a daily basis. So, and especially with everything going on with PFOAs, this is something that we monitor regularly.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question for you. As far as the failing levels that we have right now, what type of cost is that incurring the town?
None right now. I mean, there'll be a cost, of course, for the treatment system and then
Right.
operation of those systems going forward. But if you're getting it like fines or anything, there's no fines attached.
There are no fines attached, and actually you did.
Giselle may want to jump in on this too. I think the estimate that we
Off
have,
the top of my head, I'm not 100%. I do have it.
the estimate that we had from the spring, I think is the latest time that we had that updated, is about $1 million per treatment system. So you're looking at about $3 million cost, capital cost. The GAC is a little bit more expensive capital-wise than the ion exchange systems, but the operating costs are somewhat less. So over time, GAC we think is going to be the most efficient option out there for us.
Are there any grants that we can take advantage of?
Yeah, this is a
Or
little bit
something
of
to
a
offset?
this is a little bit of a vexing one, and one where you're playing off the need for the funding versus the need to get the treatment system in place as quickly as possible. So the iBank, formerly known as the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust, has certain programs available. If you're a smaller system under 10,000 customers, which we are not, there's a program for that. Under the, bear with me here for a second. What the DEP did last year was they came up with a 5-year intended use plan for the use of $1 billion of federal money, $200 million a year. So for this year, they're making, again, through the iBank, $13 million available statewide. Okay, so that covers, about 13 wells. A relative drop in the bucket, unfortunately. Most of that money is going to lead line remediation. That's the state's #1 priority. Going through the iBank, and Kevin and Giselle can talk, probably give you plenty of examples of this. We saw it on the sewer side with the level of review and the time to get the bid documents approved from the state for that. That's upwards of a year delay. So right now, the council passed a resolution earlier this year urging the DEP to establish a separate pool of money outside of the iBank process linked to securing permits for the project. So far, DEP has not responded to that at all. So right now, it does not look like there are grants that are applicable to us to meet the timeframes that we're talking about. Now, what we're hearing is there's going to be additional federal money coming down the pipe that we are starting to explore for use at the Soons well field, which are all compliant right now. I think there is some concern, and concern maybe isn't the right word, because nobody wants to stuff in their water supply.
We don't.
But right now, Soons is compliant with the state regs. There is talk of the EPA setting their levels as enforceable rather than just advisory. And if that's stricter than the state levels, or if the state levels change, we want to be in a position to basically have treatment in place already. So I think what we're going to wind up going towards is full treatment on the whole water system, but we're going to be trying to get grant money for the Soons wellfield site.
So you brought up one last thing, I promise. Excuse me. We're talking about 15 months essentially before, hopefully, before anything, hopefully it'll be that short.
15 to 18.
Yeah, 15, okay, and who knows, there could be other things, roadblocks along the way. What can we do now? Because we can't drink, I'm not personally comfortable. I know a lot of people here may be comfortable drinking the water, but I know you are, I understand, but I actually, the minute I heard about this, we went out and bought, water, and it's not ideal how we're working right now. Is there anything that we can do now, short of the systems that, we pay thousands of dollars to put into our homes? Is there any sort of town,
The EPA does have a, it's the EPA?
The EPA, the Board of Health, New Jersey Board of Health, I don't know if you can hear me, I'm sorry, right? You need to put this on. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? These are two suggestions from the EPA and then the New Jersey Department of Health, and the link is at the end of the presentation. It has a lot of good information for the New Jersey Board of Health one. And then they do recommend, the pitcher filters and the refrigerator. I don't know if you have refrigerator filters. Just make sure they're changed if But those are two suggestions that they have if you have immediate concerns and don't want to wait for the systems to be installed.
Is there anything that we can do as a town to offer the residents, some sort of discount as a group purchase or something to that effect?
In terms of what?
Well, I mean, as far as more people who are going to want to take those measures, perhaps if we bought in bulk, or have some sort of deal with, we can try to negotiate a deal with the service provider or providers, so that, it's very expensive. It's very expensive, and here we are, we're gonna have to wait anywhere from 15 to 18 months for water?
That's an idea that we have, this council has not even brought up yet. So now that you brought it up, and Richard is writing it down, we will discuss it.
Okay. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, can I just ask, I'm sorry, the bottled water, drinking waters, are they subject to the same tests that our wells are subject to?
Giselle and I were just speaking about that.
So the Board of Health.
Go closer to the microphone.
I'm sorry. The Board of Health, says that any bottled water sold in New Jersey must meet the standards. So if you buy, I guess, a bottled water in a different state, but they must meet the New Jersey standards. So if you buy bottled water in New Jersey, it should meet the same 13 and 14.
It's regulated by different entities, the Board of Health and the FDA, but it is required to meet those standards.
And that, at the same page I referred you to before in the resources, the Board of Health, at the bottom of that, they have more information on the bottled water.
Vin Bucelato, 28 Stone Fence Road, here in
Hello.
Oakland. Obviously, all our wells feed from the same aquifer. Have you guys been able to figure out whether there is any influence from our local cone of influence on our local wells, or is it all coming from the aquifer? And are other towns using the same aquifer experiencing the same situation?
That is a really good question. These are so prevalent in so many different sources of water that we do find that there are certain areas that you will get a hot well, you know, and we have another municipality that we had a well near a place where a fire was, and they used fire foam, and you could see the levels of the PFOAs ramp up 6 months after. And the interesting thing in Oakland is you have a sodium issue that happens 6 months after the winter, that it shows up, and so you see it. It's compliant, but you see it. This type of contamination shows up in surface water, it shows up in rivers, it shows up in groundwater, it shows up in treated wastewater. I could tell you that we have very large water companies that, you know, have interconnections, and, you know, we're required, it's a point of entry, so we're required to test at a point of entry. They have systems, their levels, it's very prevalent there. It may be running at 10 or 11, so your wells are running at 10 or 11 or 13 or 15. So it's so widespread that yes, you can find a hot spot, but you were finding it everywhere. And it just, if you see a real anomaly, you can try to trace it. We don't have that here.
Okay. The other question I have is that some of us have been in town for over 50 years. How long have we been recording these compounds? I mean, 50 years is a long time. How long have you been testing for these compounds? Is it just since 20, or did we record them previous to that?
So, before the labs could only test under, you know, like over 20. So under when they were doing testing for the EPA under the unregulated compounds, that's what it was either over or under 20, we didn't actually know. Once the regulations came into play, and that's that slide, I think, hold on, I'm sorry. This one, it tells you when they were adopted and when we started testing. So as the lab, you know, I guess as the lab technology gets more advanced, they could test to lower limits. And that's why, as of right now, the EPA advisory, the labs can only test around this area to 2, and then after that it becomes non-detect. So, you know, the technology wasn't there to test, I guess.
Okay. So my question is, for all we know, it could have been in the system for many years.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, it was in Teflon pans, it was in like food packaging containers, like, so it was everywhere. We were putting it on our sons, we were putting it all over, you know, before they knew it was harmful.
And when the testing limit was 20 parts per trillion, it was showing up as a non-detect, and it was there. So the testing protocols didn't test to that precision.
The only reason I bring that up is that I understand it's a point of concern for the whole town, but 15, 18 months sounds like a long time, but when you think how long it could have been in the system and we've been ingesting it, it might not be as long or as critical an issue for the town as it might seem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody, questions? If you think of a question later on, please, you can email me through the website, and I probably won't have the answer because I'm not an engineer, but I'll make sure our engineer gets back to you with the answer.
And I probably don't have the answer, but Giselle does.
Hi, Allie Fleeson, 224 Hiawatha Boulevard. What's the lifespan of these systems?
The treatment systems? Well, the
ones that we're gonna get.
So the carbon, it starts out testing, and let's say these standards stay the same. It starts out testing, and you're swapping out the carbon somewhere between 8
That was
months.
my follow-up question was how often are we swapping out the carbon?
So
what do we do with the waste?
So I'm sorry. So they quarterly test it as per DEP regulations. Once they start to see what, you know, a little bit of breakthrough or it starts to change, like, you know, it's time to replace the media. Depending on the flow that's going through it, is the lifespan, so it could be a year or two, it could be 6 months, depending on how much flow is going through it, and also the standard, right? So if the standard goes lower, we may have to replace the media more often. The vessel itself lasts a long time,
And when we say breakthrough, we mean after a while the carbon gets aged to a point, saturated with the contaminant to a point where it doesn't treat to the same level, and then we get breakthrough. And then once we get near that point, we swap out the carbon.
So the company comes and takes the media and then brings us new carbon.
But anticipated is about a year?
Yeah, that's, depending on.
It depends on the flow. It depends on the other water chemistry of the water too. It really, this is all chemistry. So it really depends on the water chemistry that's involved. So we see some systems that last over a year and a half. We see some systems that last, a little bit under a year. So, and then the service life of the vessels themselves, we're figuring somewhere between 30 to 40 years.
The media, what's the cost of that? Constant replacement every year?
So it depends on the same, like I said, the flow. It depends on the size of the vessel. So I want to say it's like 20,000, but off the top, we can get that information.
Yeah.
So roughly 20,000 potentially annually that we're spending to.
We'll give you the operating costs.
Yes.
Because we don't want to just throw out numbers here. This isn't the right way to do this.
Okay.
So.
It's important to understand though that we all
And
understand
it's
that we're.
important to give you the correct number. I don't want to give you an off the top of our head answer.
Hi. Vivian King, 113 Hiawatha Boulevard. I'm here as a resident of Oakland, and any questions or comments I make do not reflect any boards upon which I sit. I have to do that disclaimer, sorry. So first of all, I'm pretty disappointed that Mr. McCann is not here again. But moving on. So granular activated carbon. So I have a filtration system on my whole house, and when I heard about the PFOAs, I called the people who installed my system and asked, because I have a carbon filtration system, asked if the carbon filters out the PFOAs. And I was advised that it does not. It filters out any other contaminants. So they told me that I would have to put in the ion resin or the reverse osmosis, which is an additional cost to my system. So I'm just concerned, is this the same type of carbon system that is in like my water filter for my ice maker or my under counter for my kitchen sink, where I take out the filter and change it every 6 months?
The systems that we're talking about are specifically sized to meet the standards of the regulatory limits. The systems that are in your house, we don't know what kind of carbon it is. There are different types of carbon.
Right.
If it is the same carbon and it is sized the same way, then yes, it would treat the PFAs. I can't comment on what your supplier may have given you.
Right. So basically what you're saying is this has to do with the size of the filter and the microbes that can go through it.
It's not, no, it's.
I'm just trying to understand, because
No,
he was telling me that
there's
the carbon doesn't filter out the PFOAs.
There are certain types of carbons that are much more effective at treating PFAs than other types of carbon. So I don't know what kind of carbon this person sold you. So we can't comment on whether it's an effective way of treating PFAs. We do know that in general, carbon is a method that the Department of Health recommends on one of these links that you use in a picture in your refrigerators. So
Right, but
there
just
should
like-
be some benefit. I just can't comment on what.
But
that
just
would
like
be.
those pictures, there's different levels of what those pictures filter out. So to say that I could just go and,
I'm not the one recommending the pictures, the Department of Health. is.
Yeah, so the way that it works when we design ours, there is a contact, like a bed contact time, it has to stay in the unit for a certain amount of time, that's why you do it, I keep saying it depends on the flow, how it goes through it, so it has to stay in that carbon for a certain amount of time. The actual carbon has to be approved by DEP, so we just can't use, any off-the-shelf carbon. So everything that we've done has been according to the state regulations, and we have to provide calculations that it has 20 minutes, it's called empty bed contact time, that it's in there for a certain amount of time. So depending on the flow, that's how we design the system. So maybe that they're more generic, the ones that are.
that's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah.
So then my next question is will these filters be put on, and maybe you said it and I missed it, and I'm sorry. Will these filters be put on after the commingling of all the water, or
No.
will it be
No.
put?
So it'll be the well, the GAC unit, we chlorinate, and then it goes out. And then it blends after it's already treated. So it blends into the system after we're treating at what's called a point of entry, so right at the well.
Yes.
We treat
Oh,
it.
right at the wells?
Right at the
Okay,
well. It
so-
will not hit anyone's home without being treated.
So right at the wells it's being treated and then you commingle and it disperses?
Correct.
Okay.
It's after the well and before
Before
the
the commingling.
disinfection. No, before disinfection. You don't want to put chlorinated water through the carbon. It will
Strip it
cause
out.
the carbon to
Deteriorate too
deteriorate
quickly.
quicker.
Yeah. Okay. And then how will we get that information about the cost for the filters?
We will disclose it once we know.
Oh,
It'll be posted
we'll
on the
give you- we'll give you a
website?
detailed-
How will you do that?
We will get the information out.
We'll give you an updated cost estimate. We'll
I'm asking
provide
the council how it will be
I am
distributed
telling on
to,
behalf of the council, I assure you, we will not keep it a secret, we will get the information out.
I understand. I'm asking if it will be put on the website
How
or
are we
if it
going to
will.
put this out to the public? Council?
you.
How would you like to put this information out to the public?
I think we should put it on the website. Our website's fine.
Thank you. Now that was so simple, wasn't it, Mayor? Thank you very much.
Yes, it was. Questions?
Actually, I have one for Mr. Boswell.
Sure.
Mr. Boswell, just a question. Obviously, we're designing these to deal with the current level of filtration for PFOAs. Are these future-proofed in the event that the EPA or DEP decide to make the standards even more strict, and how do we deal with that going forward?
Yes, they are, but in addition to that, we're also trying to monitor. We're trying to monitor treatment methods that would also address other currently unregulated contaminants as well. So in the industry, it takes several years to adopt these standards. So if we become aware that a new contaminant is going to come down the pike, and we have to treat for that as well, we make a point of ensuring that the system works. For instance, we had a well in another community where volatile organic compounds were there, and there's two methods to treat for that. It's GAC, or it's what they refer to as air stripping, aeration. And we chose GAC because the aeration system treats for the volatile organic compound, but it didn't treat for the PFAs that weren't regulated yet, but were going to be regulated. So we have to both plan for higher limits on this, as well as other contaminants that we believe may be required to be treated for in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, I thank you all for coming. If you do have additional questions, or anyone who watching this on YouTube later on and has a question, please do not hesitate to ask. And as you heard the council say, when we get the estimates, it will be on the website. There will be full disclosure to everyone, that I can assure you. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
The regular council meeting will be on Wednesday night, September 14th, back at the municipal building. And don't forget, September 8th is the continuation of the hearing at the planning department.
Driveway goes down.